Hi, welcome to Explorations in Economic History. And today we are going to talk about the path to Stalinism and whether there were any alternatives offered by anyone in the Bolshevik Party. So when people talk about Stalin's rise to power and its inevitability, there are two parts to that. One part is whether it's inevitable that Stalin, as the most vicious character, rising to power is inevitable. And the other question is whether if the same policies were put into place, even if they were put into place by a docile personality, that essentially the same things would have happened. So many have argued that Stalin went against the Bolshevik Party when he pushed through a forced collectivization. And so if Bukharin or Trotsky had succeeded Lenin, then the USSR would have never become Stalinist. Is this true? Well, we know the details might have differed, and perhaps Stalin, if Trotsky had succeeded Lenin, maybe he wouldn't have been pushed through forced collectivization as quickly, but there was the collapse of NEP, and so if they wanted to build socialism, whoever came to power would have to choose between going back to markets or doing what they planned to do to build socialism, which would require forcing the collectivization. As we learned, the NEP's collapse put them in a position where either they had to have markets or they had to have collectivization. And if the people didn't want it, they would have to force it. So there were some in the party who argued against some of the tactics that were used, and who a lot of people will look back on and say, oh, look, they were more democratic, they were against Stalinism. And Trotsky argued that he was against Stalinism. However, their own platform that they put forward as what they would do if they were to take power, well, did they really differ in a way that would have produced different results? Or were they only arguing against the results that they saw, the outcome of the policies, and the actual policies that they had wouldn't have differed in a meaningful way? So there's a book called The Russian Communist Left. It's a collection of essays, and the author writes, at every step in its degeneration, the degeneration into Stalinism, voices were raised inside the party in protest. But I wonder whether the policies that were agreed upon between Stalin and the communist left of the party weren't the ones that actually led to those results that they were protesting against. So I wonder whether it isn't 6 of one and half a dozen of the other, because, actual changes to party policies, changes capable of actually producing massively different results, such as, complete decentralization, or rather any decentralization, because so long as there was planning, which was necessary so long as there was common ownership, and there had to be some kind of a plan for the use of the common ownership, until there was some policy proposal showing how you could have, more decentralization, less bureaucratism, the types of things that they wanted, how you could, until they actually provided a platform, a program explaining how you were going to get different results different from Stalinism, without abandoning all Marxist principles, you can't see that they would be any different. So, they never offered, none of these communist left groups offered any kind of policy proposals that could show how they would achieve different results. Oh, plus, they didn't have any control over the tactics when they weren't in power. So to say that they would never use those tactics we can't really know that that would actually be true once they got into power. So, for example, there were the Democratic Centralists and the Workers' Opposition, and both of them came up a little short in showing how they were going to be more democratic, or how they were even, going to be different, how they were going to oppose any of the actual policies that were producing the results that they despised, supposedly. So, for example, this is from the same book on the Russian communist left. Apparently, they didn't have any proposals for actually introducing greater democracy. The Democratic Centralists were during the war communist period, and they argued that there wasn't enough democracy. There wasn't democracy in the workplace, and so on and so forth. But they didn't actually have any policy proposals for reducing the centralization that was necessary in order to do the best that they could with the supply plan. They didn't explain how they were going to introduce more democracy and retain the same policies that they also agreed upon. So they didn't have any concrete proposals for how to make it better. And similarly, the workers' opposition never challenged the notion that the party should control the state. Again, this is from an essay that favors left communism, but does criticize the workers' opposition, because although they did argue for unionized workers to elect representatives, they still argued for a vertical hierarchy of councils that would oversee the economy. And so those workers who were representatives would have to go to this centralized hierarchy of councils, which controlled the economy, controlled the plan, and ultimately would be in charge. There was no way that this would be any different than happened under Stalin, where again you did have some nominal democracy supposedly, but there was a hierarchy, and the hierarchy meant that nobody at the bottom level actually had any say. The biggest, most significant opposition party on the communist left was called the Left Opposition. And this is from, the quotes that I have on the screen are from Robert Daniels, The Left Opposition as an Alternative to Stalinism. And Daniels is arguing in favor of the left opposition for the most part. But arguing that it was an alternative to Stalinism. However, it doesn't really, Daniels doesn't really show any reason to believe that the left opposition would have been very different to Stalinism. So he says, the article says that the left opposition had an almost mythical faith in the proletariat and its international solidarity. And then it says that they were much less willing than Lenin to resort to methods of command and discipline. However, Trotsky was pretty much the leader of the left opposition for its whole life, and he very quickly resorted to methods of command and discipline when he was in power. And in fact, he argued in favor of command and discipline. As we saw in earlier lectures, he argued that they had to use command and discipline, and anyone that was against it was clearly not in favor of the dictatorship of the proletariat, or in bringing communism to Russia. And so Daniels also says that the left opposition were strategically more idealistic and tactically more rash. And that does sound a bit like Trotsky. But in any case, he doesn't say anything